Hello and welcome to our second 2026 Archdiocesan Formation Session. My name is Peter Beer. I'm the Assistant Director of Pastoral Life and Mission for the Archdiocese, and I work alongside Sarah Moffat, Executive Director of Pastoral Life and Mission, and together we're the lead facilitators for the Synod. This session is part of a longer series of formation sessions in preparation for the Synod, and this recording is actually a makeup of a previous session. This session was originally held in person in July, where Kelly Paget came out from Broken Bay to join us in Adelaide with a live group and people online. But I forgot to press record on the Zoom. So we're re-recording it today and making it available for you, and we're very grateful to Kelly for being with us. I want to begin by acknowledging the First Nations peoples of South Australia, the Kaurna, Paramank, Mandurah, Nurjuri, Narrandjeri, Boandik, Binjali, and Maru, who have cared for this land that the Archdiocese sits on for thousands and thousands of years. We acknowledge the deep continued and spiritual attachment and relationship of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people to this country, and we commit ourselves to the ongoing journey of reconciliation. So, as I mentioned, this is part of a longer series, and we've already covered the areas of what is the Diocesan Synod. We had Archbishop Shane McKinley and Chris Cotter from the Sandhurst Diocese. Archbishop McKinley moving very soon to Brisbane. And then we will be joined by other speakers into the future. So be sure to tune in and continue the formation journey for the Synod with us. All of this is available on our Synod website at togetherontheway.au. So I'll introduce Kelly. So I first met Kelly about 9 months after I arrived in Australia. We met in August of 2017 in Toowoomba in Queensland at the annual gathering of Diocesan Youth Ministry Coordinators. And within the first few hours of that gathering, where I was meeting all these new people for the first time, I worked out pretty quickly that Kelly was a key leader in Australian youth ministry, and she was authentic, passionate, wise, and experienced in pastoral ministry, not just youth ministry, but had a greater vision of the church overall. Within a few years, Kelly was called by her diocese to take on greater responsibility as a chancellor and now as head of Mission Broken Bay. Kelly is widely respected for her work in leadership and ministry and mission across Australia. And during the 5th Australian Plenary Council, Kelly played an important role in the coordination of prayer and liturgy sessions, which set the tone for the proceedings of discernment each day. More recently, Kelly was selected by Pope Francis to be one of Oceania's non-bishop members to the General Assembly of the Synod of Bishops for Synodal Church, Communion, Participation, and Mission in 2023 and 24, better known as the Synod on Synodality. Kelly's married to Chris, has 3 beautiful children whom she'll no doubt introduce to you. And we are incredibly grateful to welcome Kelly again to the Archdiocese online and to be able to learn from her experiences in synodality. So thank you, Kelly. I'll hand over to you.
Thank you so much, Peter. It's so lovely. When the first time you introduced me, I was very humbled, and I'm humbled again. It's one of the nicest introductions I think I've ever had. So I really appreciate that. And I appreciate our friendship along the years. So it's such an honour to be able to speak with the people of the Archdiocese of Adelaide and to share a little bit of my story. I'm going to share some photos about some of my time there at the Synod and some of the things that I learnt along the way, particularly about Synod spirituality. So I'm going to share my screen. So yeah, the Synod on Synodality was quite an extraordinary experience to be part of, but like many of us who were at the Synod, it was part of a broader journey, and I want to share a little bit about that bigger journey that I've been part of and some of the pinnacle moments and really important factors of that. So firstly, As Peter mentioned, I am the very lucky wife of Chris, and I'm the mother of 3 beautiful boys, Denny, Samson, and Oscar. This photo was actually taken just days before I left for the second session of the Synod, and it was Samson, who's my middle boy here. It was the day of his first communion. I've never seen a child more excited to receive communion for the first time. But really, that my experience of synodality is so much rooted and based in this family unit. And it was quite the privilege to be able to represent them first and foremost when I attended the synod. And so my journey has taken lots of different twists and turns, but the last 5 years in particular, there has been this real focus on what is our understanding of a synodal church. I had been part of other general synods in the lead up to this time, but in my role as a diocesan coordinator. So, for example, I've been very involved in the Synod for Young People, Faith and Vocational Discernment in our local church. And so I had an awareness of general synods prior to that. But probably my biggest interaction with what it is to be a synodal church came from, prior to the synod, came from the Plenary Council. So I was actually a member of the steering committee for the second assembly of the Plenary Council, and I led the prayer team for that. That in itself was quite an extraordinary experience. And I'm just going to giggle now, realizing I'm wearing the same jumper in that photo that I'm wearing today. But that was such a formational experience for me, a tough experience. It was not an easy one as we learnt to be more synodal as a local church here in Australia. Now, all of that led to this experience that I then had leading into the Synod for a Synodal Church. Now, as some of you might be aware, this General Synod that we've just concluded last year was different for a number of reasons. We have General Synods in our church since the Second Vatican Council, but this one was a shift where Holy Father Pope Francis wanted us to really focus on what it is to be synodal and what the synodal process is, rather than focusing on a key topic like family or youth vocations, etc. The aim of this process was really to provide not just a one-off event or a one-off experience. It was to give us the scaffolds and the criteria for us to be synodal in our being ongoingly. And it was an opportunity to finesse how we discern together as the entire people of God, and to give us those structures and the spirituality to allow that. So previous to this synod, we would, the general synods would be represented by a number of different groupings of people. Firstly, the episcopal representatives. So every conference of bishops would have a certain number of people that would represent them at a synod, somewhere between 1 and 5. So in Australia, based on the size of our conference, the Australian Catholic Bishops' Conference, we would have 2 representatives that would be there, and they'd be selected and voted on from the conference itself. We then would have other heads of dicasteries, and the Roman Curia would be there, and a number of other papal appointments. So they were generally people who were picked by the Holy Father because they had a particular content expertise or expertise in the field. What Pope Francis did change, however, on the 26th of April 2023, only months before the first session, was he announced for the first time that there would be some changes to membership. So we would still have all those criteria, but he was adding a section which he called non-bishop members, 70 in total, 10 from each continental region. And the idea of these people was they were to represent the people of God in their local region, and they were to be a broad spread of men and women, different vocational states of life, and to represent people who had been witnesses to the synodal journey. He did ask that there be a preference for young people in their consideration, and he also asked that the membership from each continental region had to be at least 50% female. At that time of that announcement, I was very overwhelmed with this because I thought, what an incredible step for our church to be taking. This is a moment where we can have all of the people of God represented and have their voices heard to assist the bishops who have the role of leadership in our church in this very vital and important step for our church as we understand what it is to discern collaboratively together. I certainly had no understanding at that day in April that I would actually be selected by Pope Francis as one of those people. I knew I had been nominated because I had to accept the nomination. And at that time, I was contacted and asked if I could do so. And I said, of course, I need to speak to my husband first, because this was a really big deal. It was going to be 2 whole months away from my family in Rome to participate in this gathering, as well as all of the other surrounding events and implementation that was to follow. I spoke to my husband about this and said, I'm not sure, that this is a really long time for me to be away. And he said to me very wisely, Kelly, if the Holy Spirit wants you there, we'll make it happen. I don't think any of us actually thought that I'd get a phone call or a text message, it was, on the 2nd of July, 2023, that simply read, guess whose name the Holy Father picked. I can tell you in that moment, I think my husband thought someone had died because my reaction was that strong to the text message. I was incredibly overwhelmed. It didn't and still doesn't go past me the absolute privilege and honour, but also the weight of that, not just for myself and my family, but for my local church here in Broken Bay, my own parish, and for the church globally, that I would be one of these people that would represent the church in this way for the very first time. So there I was in this room of 363 voting members, Pope Francis being a member. So he was in the room most of the time. There were sometimes he had other engagements he had to do, but he was actually in the room a lot more than I anticipated, which is something I needed to really get used to. There was also 54 cardinals, which interestingly grew during our journey. More cardinals were selected and appointed as we journeyed across the 2 assemblies. There was over 200 bishops and archbishops. And then there was 96 non-bishop members. 46 of those were lay people and 54 women. So in a group of 350 odd, 360, I definitely still stood out. I didn't look like the regular people in the room, and it was a big deal. And I certainly felt that way, particularly early on. I didn't feel like I belonged in the very early stages. But as we moved along, we formed a very strong sense of community amongst our whole synod group. This is our class photo. This was taken just moments after Pope Francis had addressed us at the very last gathering. We had just voted on the final document. We had voted yes to every single paragraph of the final document with quite significant proportions of numbers, I must add as well. And we all joyfully came together, as Pope Francis said, isn't it time for a photo? And we all joyfully ran to the front as the media of the world then came running through the doors to take this photo. So just for you to know, I definitely am in this photo. I'm going to point out where I am right now. I'm actually pretty close to Pope Francis in this photo, and I'm right where the arrow is pointing to here. I ran up with my table. We were fairly close to the front this day, and some of my table mates were helping me because I'm a little bit short, and they were certainly helping me to get a leg up so I could be seen and not lost in the crowd. So this was such an extraordinary experience to be part of, and we would gather in the Paul VI Hall here every day, 6 days a week, 8:30 in the morning through to 7 at night, and where we would deliberate, discern, discuss and pray all of the elements of the Instrumentum Laboris, and then continue writing content that was taken forward into the final document. The arrow once again is pointing to where I was at this particular time. But for those of us in Australia, this setup was actually really familiar. As we walked down the hall on that first day with my Aussie companions, we said, oh, this looks very familiar. It was very much looking like the Plenary Council. People from around the world were a little shocked by the setup. They didn't understand how it was going to work. But thankfully, we had a lot of assurance that this would work. We had seen this work before at roundtables. Now, what you need to understand is this was how synods had happened prior to this. This room is actually, funnily enough, called the New Synod Hall. They may need to rename it now, I think, but they would sit in lecture style. They would sit in hierarchical order, but also in order of seniority as well. So the cardinals at the front, then archbishops, then bishops, then any other clerics in the back rows, and even the cardinals would be lined up in order of when they became cardinal. It was very hierarchical in its structure, and the Holy Father with the presider would sit at the front and present, and it was very one-dimensional in the way it was just being facilitated. And if you consider what we did then in the synod we've just had, it's actually interesting to understand how synodality would occur in a lecture theatre when it really needs to happen around round tables so people can discern, discuss, and pray together. Now, those round tables would work like this. There were 35 tables in the room, and there were 5 language groups. The language groups being English, Italian, Spanish, French, and Portuguese. Pope Francis was the one, of course, who instigated the Portuguese-speaking language as being an official language of the Holy See. Now, interestingly, over half of the tables then basically were English. 16 of those tables were English. It meant that the English-speaking tables were very diverse in their cultural mix and very broad in what they were doing. An Italian table would primarily only have Italians at it, but English-speaking tables would have all of those who were native English speakers, which is quite a broad section of our world, but would also have anyone who didn't fall into the other categories, basically. And so at any time at one of my tables, I would have people from every continent. So it meant that my experience of the synod was incredibly broad, and I got to experience the whole global church in that experience. But at our tables, we'd have 12 members, and we'd have a facilitator who is represented by the dot here. The facilitator was not a member, but they were appointed by the Secretariat of the Synod to keep the proceedings moving, to keep us on time, to make sure we kept to our 3-minute talks, and to ensure the process was moving smoothly. The Secretariat would then also appoint from the members a secretary. And so that was primarily a bishop or an archbishop who would be asked to take the notes and to assist the rapporteur or the reporter. The relator was elected by the team. And so at the beginning of every module, we had 5 modules per session. We would stop as a group and we would vote on the relator. Their role would be to finalise the final report of the team. It would be to pull together a speech and then give a speech to the floor on behalf of the table. Now, in that first session of the synod, I was elected the relator or the rapporteur 4 times out of 5. It meant that I actually wasn't getting much sleep in that first session. And it was actually a bit of an interesting dynamic because it appeared that across the room that the lay members of the synod were the ones who kept being picked as the rapporteurs who had to do some of that work. I think we probably can do a little bit of discernment about why that might have been. But I think one of the key factors to that is many of the lay people in the room work for the church, and that's part of our role all the time, is to assist bishops and the clergy to formulate and to bring together some of their concepts and to document it and articulate it in a way for them. So I think there was a skill set that they realised that they had in the room that they hadn't had before. So what would happen then is those relators would go to linguistic tables at the end of the day, and they would share with their linguistic table what were the emerging themes of the day. Those emerging themes would then be collated from these linguistic tables, and a reporter from every linguistic table would go then to the executive team of the synod, and they would discern what the agenda would be for the next day for general intervention. So this was a period of time where anyone could speak to the floor, and it would be to the whole room, not just to your table. And so to assist to keep us on track, and so people weren't just speaking to their own agendas, the preparation of the agendas at this level was really important, and an excellent example of synodality working to discern where the room was taking the conversation, and to ensure that the spirit was actually moving through and no individual agendas were taking over. So I just wanted to show you this because I found really important here was all of the tables being round, but also the presidential table was round. I took this photo myself. I'm actually standing at Pope Francis's chair. He obviously wasn't in the room at the time when I took this. And I just wanted to point out that even he, as a member, was treated like all the other members. There was a couple of distinct differences. One of them being he had armrests on his chair, and I think that was just a practicality for him. He wanted to sit in the chair and not in his wheelchair the whole time, so it enabled him to move in and out of his wheelchair. The presidential table was slightly elevated, so we could see it, but not much. It was only an elevation by a step. And lastly, Pope Francis's iPad, where he would manage all of his documents, he had a white iPad cover, and everyone else's iPad covers were black. It was extraordinary facilities and infrastructure that enabled this gathering to happen. When we were at these tables, this camera here would actually turn to face you, and it meant that at no time did you have to turn or crank your neck to see anyone speaking, because you would be able to speak at your table still facing the centre, and your face would come up on these 4 screens that were on every table. Your microphone would come on, and you'd use your iPad to book a time that you would like to speak if you wanted to speak about a particular topic. You'll also notice here, these are our translation headsets, particularly when we were in the general plenary sessions. We would have to wear headsets the whole time so we could hear translation of the other languages. That did make it a little taxing. A whole day of listening, particularly when you're hearing translation, is actually really tiring. And I'm not going to deny that this month, both months, were incredibly intellectually and physically tiring. Only having one day off a week as well was made it pretty hard work, because on your one day off a week, you're then trying to catch up, try and get some sleep, try and do your washing. So it really was a full-on experience to be part of. So my experience had been captured in photos by a number of different people, and I just wanted to highlight this photo here. It may not be easy to see, but I'm actually quite emotional in this photo. This is all of the synod members walking in the entrance procession for the opening mass of the second session. We're walking up the aisle of the square in St. Peter's, and I was so overwhelmed with the experience of being in this liturgical procession with the Holy Father, and that I had been selected to represent the people of the world in this moment and the people of Oceania. And so I was quite emotional. And in the room, there were times where there was a lot of laughter. There were times where there was really serious moments. A lot of times where I was working, this moment here, this was my secretary this time. He is an archbishop, Sarah Malabar archbishop, and he actually asked for this photo to be taken so he could prove to his people back in his community that he was the secretary to a woman who was voted in to be the reporter. It was such a wonderful opportunity to share and be vulnerable. And I think that was one of the gifts of the lay members of the room that I don't think has been in previous synods. Vulnerability that was allowed in the room enabled people to share openly and at times emotionally about their own experiences of the church. It meant that, yeah, I did cry in the room. I cried when I heard other stories, and I shed tears when I shared my own story. I think what it also enabled was the bishops and the archbishops in the room to be vulnerable in a way that they've never been vulnerable before. And we saw that, and it was incredibly powerful to see the strength in that vulnerability and the safe place that had been created to enable that. So I was able to do a number of things. And as I said, I was rapporteur a number of times. And so the very first time that I was a rapporteur, my name came up on the screen like this. You can see it here. And it says Chancellor of the Diocese of Broken Bay, Australia. Now, when that happened, there was a little bit of a commotion in the room, and I didn't know why. I got a little shocked, a little red in the face, and I stopped for a second, and the bishop beside me just said, no, it's okay, keep going. He assured me it wasn't me. What I realised later from some conversations, particularly with my own bishop, he said the fact that a woman came up on the screen as chancellor was shocking for the majority of the room. Certainly in the European Church, they do not have examples of anyone other than clerics being chancellors. And so when my bishop, who had worked in the dicastery for the Doctrine of Faith for 10 years, was getting text messages from his Italian bishop friends saying, well, aren't you very progressive in Australia? He responded to them and say, well, there's nothing in canon law that would stop her from being the chancellor. She's just living out her baptismal calling. So I realised in that moment that even my presence and the role that I fulfill in the church was something that was enabling change in the room. And it did lead to conversations about that and how women can be appointed to roles of leadership in our church, canonical roles of leadership already, but we're not fulfilling what is already available to us within canon law. So in the experience, I did get to meet the Holy Father, Pope Francis. This is a photo of my very first time meeting him, where I was kind of embarrassed myself a little bit. I was so overwhelmed with the moment that I only got out 2 words, and they were Kelly, Australia, and he responded with Kelly, Australia. And that was the end of the conversation. I thought I had done my dash of having wonderful conversations with the Pope, but thankfully, I actually had another 3 one-on-one encounters with him, which I'll share a little bit with you in a moment. But I also want to share with you some of these other incredible groups that I got to work with. And you see here, this was my home table from the first session. And you can see the diversity of culture, of vocational status in the room that I got to be part of. I also had the incredible joy of journeying with a group that we now call my Synod family. And this group down here, we stayed together in the same accommodation for both the first and the second assembly. So we got to know each other very well, and we still talk almost daily as we share our continued synodal journeys together. Even in this example, we met for Mass every morning at 6 a.m. in the morning before we'd start our day. And in this, we had people from a Maori from New Zealand, an Indigenous Australian, and another Aussie who's come via New Zealand and India, a bishop from Seychelles, an archbishop from Trinidad and Tobago, Papua New Guinea, Fiji, and Malaysia. So we had such a broad expression even in our daily gatherings and at the dinner table every day. So my time there was quite privileged, as well as a lot of hard work. And I was able to, at the very end, my last one-on-one meeting with the Pope was actually with my husband as well. We snuck him into the room, literally snuck him in. He wasn't supposed to be in there. And Pope Francis thanked him for his part in the synodal journey. And he gave us a blessing for our marriage, which is a really special moment. He also signed for me, which I was really pleased with. He had just released the encyclical on the Sacred Heart, and I had the first printed copies, and he signed that for me. So that will be a very special family relic in our house now. So I just want to share with you this really special moment. And this was the second time I met Pope Francis one-on-one, and I got to introduce him to my family. I spent about 4 or 5 minutes talking with him, sitting at the table. And I was able to talk to him about my family, show him photos, and he was so engaged with that conversation. It was so beautiful. He asked about my husband. He said to me, "Is this your love?" And I said, "This is my love. His name is Chris." He asked about the age of my boys. He asked their names. And I was able to pass on to him letters and cards that they had written to him. He said to me, "Can I take these?" And I said, "They are for you, Holy Father. We'd love you to take them." And he said, "Because I'd really like to pray for you, but on one condition." And I said, "Anything, Holy Father." And you can see, actually, that's exactly what I'm saying here. "Anything. What would you like me to say?" And he said, "Well, only if you pray for me." And I said, "We do, Holy Father. Every night we pray for you." And then he looked at me and he sat back, and he said, "Can you do a better job then?" So the Holy Father had a really wonderful and cheeky sense of humor. He was such a grandfather figure in the room, full of wisdom, but he was so full of joy and hope and love. It was so palpable. It was such an honor to be able to meet him and to discuss, share with him my family, and to share these letters. Just to quickly flick through, these are the letters that my boys wrote to him. My eldest son, who's Denny, is 14. He was asking for him to pray for him as he started school and to look after his lovely mummy, which I thought was nice. My middle son, who had said, "I think I might be a priest one day." And he said to me, "I picked Carlo Acutis for my confirmation saint. I hope he'll be a saint one day." Now, if anyone can please ever meet my son, he thinks it's because of this letter that Carlo Acutis is about to be canonized, so please don't ruin it for him by telling him otherwise. But he does think it's this letter that made it happen. And then my youngest, who was too young to write at the time, that he wanted to really tell the Holy Father how much he loved daycare and his mum and dad. And of course, he loved water parks with slides. And you know what? Pope Francis loved that. He got the giggles about it and he thought it was wonderful. So all of this happened, we now move into this implementation phase. So I have had this beautiful individual experience, but what I was part of was something much bigger. And now that we're in this implementation phase where local churches around the world are being invited into this space, invited to have your own assemblies and synods before we have a ecclesial gathering in 2028. So as we move towards that, you in Adelaide have already been called into this directly, and that you are having this synod as part of this broader implementation. But it's not just for the implementation's sake, it is for your local church. And it's a really exciting that I'm get to be part of it on the peripheries and watch what you're doing. So when we met face to face, I had its opportunity to ask people, what has been your experience of synodality? And so, although I don't have a crowd here with me today, I just want to offer you that question still. And that might be something for you to discern after you've listened to this talk. What has been your experience up until this point? And what's your hopes moving forward? But what I want to share with you as I come to conclude this time is what I came to really understand, and what's highlighted in the final document is there are lots of processes and structures and governance models that can assist us to have more synodality within our church, but we actually need to be more synodal. And there is a spirituality that forms that we need to understand. There's actually a document that was created prior to the Synod gatherings that is called Towards a Synod Spirituality. And this graphic is taken from that document, where it talks about there's all the gifts that we bring from all the people of God that allow us to be grounded and rooted in our traditions and our faith, the wisdom that comes from 2,000 years of tradition. We're also using those charisms to branch out, to have new life, to have growth, and to grow strong and firm in our faith. One of the things that we learnt from Cardinal Timothy Radcliffe, who led our synod meditations, in the first session, he talked about how we as a synodal church need to be a place where we are bringing the outside in and the inside out. And he gave us this analogy from Thomas Merton, where he said that we need to discover that God is at the center of everywhere and whose circumference is nowhere. He used the analogy of dough and how when we knead dough, we gently pull the dough from the outside into the center and we press it into the dough, moving it to the outside. So the outside becomes the center and is intermerged with the center, and the center is pushed to the outside. And that action of doing that gives it life and oxygenates it and makes it rise and grow. I think it's such a beautiful analogy that we're making God's loaf of bread together. And this synodal journey is to be seen as that. So no one is left on the peripheries. They are brought into the center and welcomed in. And that welcoming in oxygenates the center. And then the center then permeates all that we are. In the final document in paragraph 43, it actually talks explicitly about synod spirituality. So synod spirituality is, synodality, is primarily a spiritual disposition, as it says here. It permeates the daily life of the baptized and every aspect of our church's mission. It flows from the action of the Holy Spirit and requires listening to the word of God, contemplation, silence, and conversion of heart. So it's really cementing for us that synodality is not a procedural thing, although procedures assist us. Synodality is about our spirituality and how we be synodal. If you ever get a chance to read this, Timothy Radcliffe actually referred to this, I think, in his third meditation, when funnily enough, he was actually talking about the Australian church, and he used the Ode to Church from Carlo Coretto. I have this sitting in my office at home up on the wall. It was given to me by a director that I worked with a number of years ago, and it always reminds me of the joy and the challenges of working for church, but how I would never want to be anywhere else. And so if you ever get an opportunity to look up the Ode to Church, I think it's a really powerful prayer for our journey as missionaries in the church. I invite you to read that in your own time. So I talk about synod spirituality. There was 4 things that my little synod peripheries family would talk about over dinner, and we'd share with each other, how do we talk about this when we get home? How do we easily wrap this up for people to understand this experience that we have had, this intensive experience of synodality that we've lived? How do we share that with people back home? And we came up with 4 key markers of a synodal church. We must be relating. We must be a listening church. We must be a discerning church, collaboratively discerning, and a self-emptying church, all through the example and model of Jesus Christ himself. Now, what I want to point out to you is these documents and where you can find some of these. I have put the QR codes here. You can pause the video and get these. Timothy Radcliffe's meditations. You can also go to the School for Synodality, where you will find a number of resources to help you break open the final document, including the book club that breaks it open into all of the sections, which is very useful. And Archbishop Jason, who was the Archbishop who was living at the same residence as us from Trinidad and Tobago, he's gone on to write an article about these 4 key markers of a synodal church, and you'll be able to find that article here. But for expedience of time, I will very quickly take you through those 4 key markers and where Timothy Radcliffe spoke about them as well in his meditations. In his meditation on friendship, he talked very importantly about, as a synod community, our most important task was to make friends. And it's only through the relationship of all the synod members that we're actually going to see true growth. But our friendships was not only to be with each other, it was primarily to be with Jesus. And that divine friendship that we're reminded of through our Eucharistic prayer, where 4 times it is said to us, the Lord be with you. And so he said to us that we need to live in a way where when we're together in this synodal experience, that we see each other as if it was for the first time each time, and that we're learning about each other in new ways all the time. He talked about that we needed to be brave to ensure that these friendships were flourishing, and that we needed to dare to share our doubts when we are seeking the truth. It was at this time also that he talked about the point of talking to people who already know everything wasn't going to bring us anywhere. Nor was talking to people that we completely agreed with. That we actually needed to branch out with our friendships and to speak to the other and to bring them into friendship with us. In his meditation on the conversion of the way to Emmaus, he talked a lot about listening. He said that one of our roles in the synod was to ensure that voices would be heard, particularly the voice of the voiceless, those who have been ignored. And he asked that we must ensure that we are listening before we speak. He gave the great analogy, which I've said a number of times since then, of we are born with 2 ears but 1 mouth. And so therefore we really should be listening twice as much as we speak. And only after listening should we speak. He encouraged us to listen not just to words, but to unspoken language and to seek out those unspoken moments. And he talked about when we truly listen and are in friendship with each other, then we will be converted. There will be a conversion of heart. And that is risky because we will not be the same at the end of this experience. So that was a challenge to all of us to be free enough to do that, to be free enough to be converted and to be changed. He discussed with us the importance of discerning. In his meditation called The Spirit of Truth, he talked about how when we have conflict along the way, how are we ensuring that the Spirit of Truth is leading us to all the truth? He talked about the fact that it may not be easy, because all of us come to these conversations believing that we hold the truth. But we're going to understand along this discernment process that there's going to be different varying versions of the truth. But when we come together in synod, we can actually have the fullness of all of the truth. He talked about that we needed to not be threatened by other people's truth, and that in itself is a treasure. We need to open ourselves, and what a beautiful sentence he said, we must be open ourselves, our hearts and our mind, to the spaciousness of the divine truth that actually can encompass all of that. And I love this, and I've used this a lot since I've come back. It's our encouragement not to say but anymore. Yes, I agree, but. He talked about the damned Catholic and. So rather than saying no to people or but, we can say to them yes and. So we're expanding our understanding rather than cutting people's experiences off. He did say that as a church, there is times that we must say no, though. But he did encourage us to consider at what times can we say yes and. And lastly, self-emptying. If this synod has the dynamics of prayer more than a parliament, it will ask all of us to let go. We need to let go and let God, letting God be God. As he said to many of us, we have this profound instinct to hang on to control, which is why so many had feared the synod and why so many still do fear the synod. He in fact said to us on the very first day, in this room there is a lot of fear. There is fear that nothing is going to change, and there is fear that everything is going to change. And how we were going to meet in the middle in all of that was going to be by through all these things. And so in this self-emptying, we come back to this point, as it says in the final document, the synod spirituality requires of us to be to self-empty, to be humble, to come willingly with open hearts, to seek forgiveness and to be forgiven. And it was through all of that, that without ambition, envy, or desire to control, that we can join together and be self-emptying, emptied himself to take the form of a slave as Christ did. And so that gives us a bit of a very quick roundup of what a synod spirituality is. And I think this is a topic that our church is going to continue to discern together for some time, because truly understanding this underpins everything we are going to do. We can change all of the structures and governance models in the world, but unless we are synodal in our approach, it will not work. And so our synodal spirituality becomes the foundation of all we do, and led by the Holy Spirit through the example of Jesus Christ and listening to his words in the Gospels. And so I just wanted to finish with the very last paragraph of the final document. It says, every new step in the life of the church is a return to its source. It is a renewed experience of the disciples' encounter with the risen one in the upper room on the Easter evening. Like them, during this Synod Assembly, we too felt enfolded in his mercy and drawn into his beauty. We felt his presence in our midst as we lived conversation in the Spirit and listened to one another. The presence of he who, in bestowing the Holy Spirit, continues to build among his people a unity that establishes harmony amongst differences. This is one of the 8 paragraphs that had 100% agreement from all of the synod members, because I think that summarizes what it is to be synodal, but also the experience that we had intensely lived. It was such a privileged experience to be part of. And also summarizes a key point that Pope Francis had said to us a couple of times about not being a parliament, being a church that is synodal. But he said over and over and over again to us, we are not called to uniformity, we're called to unity in our diversity. So if that's anything I could leave you with, is understanding we're not called to be one version of the church, which only one path. He acknowledges the beauty of the breadth of our universal church, and that we're called to have unity in that, not uniformity. And so with that, I'm going to hand it back to Peter. And thank you again. So you might be listening to it again, or those who've listened to it for the first time. Thank you for participating today, and thank you for listening to my story.
So thank you so much. Hearing this is now the 3rd time I think I've heard about your experience and with different focuses, and even I'm picking up different things from when you were here in Adelaide and what you spoke about then. And I know people are very interested in your experience of being at the global synod, and it was such a public way of, even though you were in private so often and there was all these restrictions around what you could expose and all that. But it was, you were in the global eye. But I also think, I know you are in your own diocese, you've got your own processes and the ways that you've been engaging synodal practices and those kinds of things in different ways that have that are unique to Broken Bay, which I think reflect the diocese
Yeah.
and the different parishes and the various communities. But one of the things I wanted to ask you, um, in the preparation and during the synod itself, and maybe
Mm.
even now, what are some of the spiritual practices, prayer, meditation, like what is it that helped you to prepare for the synod and
Mhm.
sustain you through the synod? And is there anything now that
Mm.
you're continuing or that maybe has changed or evolved to meet your current reality?
Yeah. It's really a couple of things I did quite deliberately because I knew I had to take it pretty seriously going into the synod. Like I had to be prepared for myself. So look, it was really deliberate actions that I took. It was participating in sacrament of reconciliation before I left, but also when I arrived in Rome, I wanted to make sure that I had that grace going into the room. Um, there was a real intent focus on ensuring that I was prepared. So by reading all of the synod documents, but also being prepared by reading the Word of God. And so doing Lectio Divina every day became a bit of a pattern for me, and it's actually something that I've maintained.
Mm,
I use an app now to assist me with that as I'm driving in the car. Pray as you go. But it is something that I do every day now to make sure I'm listening to the Word of God spoken to me every day. Um, there were certainly other things along the journey that became really important. Daily mass, that us coming together, we were exhausted, but we did not fail every morning at 6 o'clock getting up as our little group and having daily mass. Um, it's not part of my regular piety as a working mum and getting kids. I can't get to mass every day. We certainly have opportunity in my workplace, which I'm very lucky about, a couple of times a week. But that daily mass, when I was in that intense experience, was very important.
mm,
Um, and so it was understand the ebbs and flows of that moment for me. I needed to have daily mass at that time to make sure I was being nourished. Um, but certainly, I think the synod changed me in the way I approach many things because my day to day conversations with people, I think, are now different. And I only recognize that now in hindsight, and probably some of my colleagues pointing it out to me, saying that that you're different now. Because I think I engage in conversations in a different way. I listen to people differently. Um, and I call people into prayer quite instinctively now in moments where I think, like, I think we need to stop and pray. So I think it has rejuvenated my prayer life, as well as supported the synodal journey.
that's fantastic.
Mm.
Yeah, thank you. That kind of answered my second question, which was around what did you experience? Like what uh, Pope Francis talked about a synodal conversion, and
Yeah.
and so that was my question. What change did you notice in yourself? And
Yeah.
yeah, and you're bringing that into your. It's not just changed you for you, but it's changed
Mm.
you for the world now. It seems.
Yeah.
Yeah.
One of my colleagues who I admire a lot, a woman of such wisdom, she said to me, Kelly, you dance with the spirit of synodality now. And I thought it was such a beautiful analogy. She said it's just become so naturally to you, but it's joy filled and hope filled. So I hope that my witness to that is also something that might um, draw people into this encounter with Jesus primarily. Um, and it's just about naturally sort of dancing through the challenges of life and thinking about things in a more um, open and broad way rather than coming into conversations wanting to stand firm on my agenda,
Mm.
um, and knowing that I'm going to grow and change from that. Mm.
Oh, well, I know you've got to run off. You've been very generous with your time to come back and do this for us again. I know from what I've heard from people who heard you the first time in
Yeah.
Adelaide, um, your stories about the synod and the fact that you were there representing Australia,
Mm.
Oceania, women, lay
Mm.
people, lay ministers in the church, parents,
Yeah.
all of the above.
Mm.
I think people were very, very grateful for that. I'm grateful for your insights on spirituality and synodality. The 4 marks in particular, people have come back to and said, yeah, I want to look more at that. How can we incorporate that? So I just want to say thank you again for sharing your experience, your wisdom, and for inspiring us and helping us to prepare and continue our synodal journey in Adelaide. And again, thank you for your friendship and
Oh,
your
thank you, Peter.
generosity. Yeah.
No, I appreciate it. No, I appreciate being able to be in Adelaide when I was earlier last month. It was actually a really joyful experience as well. So thank you.
Well, for those who are watching, you can find other videos, further resources, and more information about our synod and the formation series at togetherontheway.au, and we'll be sure to be sharing more. So thank you, everyone, and we'll see you soon.
Bye.